Welcome to the Dark Mind Podcast. Friends and familiars, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Dark Mind Podcast, where we explore the boundless realm of dark literature and film. On today's show, I have an author of speculative fiction that has written an epic tale about the terrifying relativity of memory. He's joining me today to discuss his infamous novel entitled Head Like a Hole. So without further ado, join me as we delve into the dark insight of Andrew Van Way. All right, friends and familiars, we are live on YouTube, Twitch, and X with Andrew Van Way, here to discuss his novel, Head Like a Hole. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Vincent. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to chatting and talking about 90s horror and all things spooky and dark.
Hell yes, everything spooky and dark within the 90s.
Absolutely, and maybe a little beyond.
Yeah, definitely. But definitely the 90s. We got to go there.
Yep. Oh yeah,
we both have a connection to that.
Yep, I think we do.
Well, thank you for joining me on this 15th day of October 2024. All of your work, but specifically your novel Head Like a Hole, came highly recommended by Andrew Nyberg when I recently had him back on the show. So I decided to check it out, and just like the title itself being the name of a popular song from the 90s, it instantly connected me with my status as what I would call a pediatric Gen Xer. The story was bizarre, eerie, psychological, and technological, with the all-encompassing element of being terrifying. The ending made me question my memory of the storyline, as well as kind of my own sanity, to be honest with you. So thank you for being on the show and allowing me to explore the construction of this multifaceted story with you.
Thank you for having me. And wow, that's high praise indeed. As a child of the 90s, having my brain twisted around and turned upside down and confused is always something that's fun, especially in my horror fiction. So I appreciate those words and thank you for spending your time with them.
Absolutely. All right, so let's get right into it. The book is about a man named, is it Anwar?
Yep, Anwar.
Okay. Anwar, who hosts a true crime podcast called Suburban Murders and is visiting a woman named Megan. Megan was involved in a series of tragic events in the 90s in which the facts seem to have been set in stone and laid to rest. However, Anwar is the nephew of a detective who was intimately involved with the case and has uncovered new evidence in the form of a personal notebook that his uncle kept involving the case. So given the dramatic changes between the 90s and the current time when Anwar is interviewing Megan, which I guess would be like early aughts?
Yeah, the contemporary time would be, 2022, something like that.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, 2021, 2022.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Current time when Anwar is interviewing Megan, particularly with the arrival of the internet, what were some of the key things that you had to keep track of as far as what did and didn't exist as you bounced back and forth between those time periods?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And that was one of the really fun parts of researching this novel is because, my memory of what the 90s are, I was born in 79. So, I was 11 when 1990 happened. And when, 89 was when Head Like a Hole came out. Mm-hmm. And, I was 21 at the turn of Y2K. So I had to kind of triangulate my memory of that time with what was actually there. Because in my memory of the time, the internet was kind of everywhere. Like my family was kind of plugged in. We got a dial-up modem, 28K, and then a 56K, and then DSL in the mid-90s and whatnot. But it still wasn't that common. And I remember going to college in 98, and I had some friends from high school who just didn't have email. Like there was no way to contact them. Pagers were still kind of a thing towards the late 90s, although they were dying out a little bit. So I had to triangulate and correct my memory. And this book plays around with memory a lot because, memories are parts of our brain that are re-encoded every time we think about them. And the more we remember, the more we actually change our memories. So I had to be really careful and research, like what year was a Motorola StarTAC? When did that come out? When did, cell phones start becoming ubiquitous? And in the book, it's 1995 to 1996. Most of the book takes place in 96, although there's a little flashback in 94. And, cell phones really still weren't that common. I got my first cell phone in 99. But they just weren't that common. A Nokia 6160, which is that kind of brick that everyone remembers. It's almost like a meme phone.
Like the one in Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, no, that's the big one. Okay. That's the huge one. Kind of the Wall Street one that you got clamped into your car, right? Yeah, those would have been out in the 80s. That was in the 80s. I actually had a friend whose dad had one in a car, and I remember just being amazed at that. But it was like you're calling in an airstrike with that thing. It was less a cell phone and more like an actual radio tower that you carried around with you. Yeah. Exactly. So to answer your question in a roundabout way, I had to revisit all my memories and to really pressure check to make sure that my memory of 1996 correlated with the actual technology that people had in 1996. Like MP3s hadn't come out. That was around 97 to 98. And I was in college in 98 and I remember MP3s. So I had to double check, would a high school kid in 96 know what an MP3 is? And no, they wouldn't. So there were a lot of things like that. The research for this novel was constant and ongoing. It was so much fun though to go back and listen to music during that time as well. We can go down that rabbit hole too if you want.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm surprised that I didn't decide to ask you about this, but since you mentioned it, I kind of wanted to get into it a little, not to derail too much from the trajectory of the conversation. But you mentioned memories being re-encoded every time you bring them to the surface. Your book is not the first time I've heard that, so I'm assuming that's solid science.
Yeah, it's pretty solid science at this point. Yeah, the way that we store memories and the way that, the neurons basically and the synapses connect and the way that we remember something slightly changes every time, especially if it's a much older memory that we haven't drawn from.
Yeah, because I always think about, I feel like I remember, like me and my wife will have inside jokes where we'll quote movie lines.
Yep.
Movies that we haven't seen quite a while. And then we'll go back and watch the movie and be like, oh, they didn't really say it like that. Or, the verbiage was different. And it's like, it's kind of scary when you think in the context of like a trial when you like eyewitnesses, you think those are the best witnesses, not so much.
No, they're some of the worst actually. And it's wild, right? There's, the Mandela effect where some people actually believe that Nelson Mandela died in the 80s. And they also kind of call it false memory syndrome. There's the Berenstain Bears versus the Bernstein Bears. And a lot of people just remember it as the Bernstein Bears, or is it the Berenstain Bears? And I actually get confused now because I can see the book very clearly in my head, but the title itself is kind of blurry and out of focus. And if you were to ask me to wager money on it, I would say it's probably the Berenstain Bears, not the Berenstain Bears. But a lot of people misremember that, and they will absolutely fight you tooth and nail that they are right.
Yeah, and people with, I don't know if it's isolated to dementia, or isolated to Alzheimer's, or if it can just be any sort of generalized dementia, but the concept of confabulation, having memories that aren't even real, like not that they're skewed, like they just never existed to begin with. That is weird to me.
Yeah, and the associations that those memories also bring up too. Like my wife has synesthesia, so a lot of stuff she'll see in colors, in big bright colors, and so she associates things with colors and music for her, a song will produce auras and it'll produce, vibrations that she can almost see. Whereas for me, it's sound, it's noise, and I enjoy it, but she enjoys it on a different level than me. And which one of our realities is right? Is it mine or is it hers? And that's kind of what this book explores in a roundabout way.
Gotcha. Well, welcome to our live listener that just signed on. Let me throw a little welcome into the chat there. So circling back to the book, the story flashes to the arrival of a very important, you know what screwed me up on that is I really did not want to use this word, but I thought it was appropriate. Enigmatic? Oh my God, I can't believe I got it out. All right. Character. A simple man named Lewis Harding is crabbing along the Atlantic coast when he empties one of his pots and makes the gruesome discovery of a female human head. What's even more terrifying is that the head not only talks to him, but also seduces him. So was the head ending up in the pot completely random, or was Lewis targeted? And if so, why?
Well, that's a complicated question, and I'd say you'd have to read the book to find out the answer. So the head wasn't necessarily targeting Lewis, but Lewis was the best opportunity there. It didn't put itself in the crab pot, but if we can imagine that the head was still alive while it was in the bay, and however it got to the bay is a big part of the story, but the head getting to the crab pot probably decided at some point that a crab pot was its best way to get out of the water, and probably did what a head like that would do and crawled its way and inched its way forward into the crab pot while, slowly decaying and whatnot, and hoping that someone's going to pull that pot up. So no, Lewis wasn't personally targeted, although I think that once Oksana opened her eye and looked at Lewis, she had everything that she needed right there.
Yeah, and listeners at home that have not read this book, the interaction with this thing and the visceral details of the articulation of the jaw and the eye and all of the marine life that's kind of Shawshanked its way into this head it's really creepy and disturbing. So kudos to you, sir, for making my skin crawl.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I'm not an extreme horror writer. I'd say most of my stuff is like a 3 out of 5. It's solid in the Stephen King lane. But I come from a family of doctors. My parents are both doctors, and I grew up in a medical household. So being as medically accurate as I can while still being in the realm of the speculative is like a huge fun sandbox for me to play with. So, how would a head speak, if it's nothing really there, like vocal cords, it needs lungs to push wind past its throat. There's anatomical considerations that you have to make. And, I try to be as realistic as I can in my research while not, alerting the FBI.
Gotcha. Well, as you were just alluding to, the head isn't structurally sound enough to speak out loud at first, so it communicates through a form of telepathy and reveals, as you said, her name is Oksana. Telepathy can be a form of psychological horror due to the fact that it invades the mind and invades it. It's kind of like a breaking of a boundary, like, a little a violation, so to speak. So what aspects of telepathy did you find most horrifying or unsettling to explore in your writing?
So that is a great point that you just made. It is incredibly violating. There's very few places that we have that are more sacred than our own mind. It's the last castle. It's the fortress. People can see everything outside, but they can't see into that. And that was very important to me, that Oksana, as being reduced to essentially what is a head with a pair of, lungs attached to her, is able to invade someone and to get into her head. So, in regards to forms of telepathy, wow, it's always been something that has fascinated me. It's always been an idea that scares me, that our brains essentially aren't as fortified as we think they are. And, some machines like fMRIs and what they call magneto, I'm going to mess it up, magnetoencephalography, something It's a magnetic machine that can actually read your brain, and they can correlate different centers of your head.
Is it magnetic encephalogram?
Yes.
Encephalogram?
Yeah. I was going to say like magnetic esophagus or something like that, but no. Yeah, I'm despite, growing up in a medical household, I can never pronounce half of those words. And I think they're there just to stump me anyways. But yeah, that is it. And yeah, there's some wild research that they can do with that, and to watch different parts of your brain lighting up while they ask you questions. And, at some point in the future, we might be, kind of a little bit more of a minority reportish culture where we can actually use that as evidence rather than eyewitness statements, or use that to cross-reference eyewitness statements. So all of that, those ideas of your brain essentially being not as safe as we think, fascinate me and scare me and horrify me. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a perfect entry point for Oksana and Lewis's relationship. As much of a nasty relationship as it is a relationship.
Do you believe that telepathy is a real thing? Because I've read about Project Stargate when they were trying to do remote viewing and stuff. Yep. Like, apparently some people thought it was theoretically possible enough to the point where they spent tax dollars on it.
Yes. Yeah. Project MK Ultra as well. There's some really interesting stuff. I actually wrote a techno thriller series that has a huge elements of horror that explores like astral projection, if it could be weaponized, if it was part of a government experiment. Yeah. And do I believe in it? I haven't seen evidence for it, but as always, the speculative person in me loves to play around in that. I do think that our brain is the last frontier of our life and of technologically. And I think that there's going to come a time where, we're going to know a lot more about it than we currently do. And certain things are going to be revealed that, maybe that sixth sense or that idea was just our brain, sympathetic neurons firing in relation to another stimulus. I don't believe in telepathy necessarily, but I would be open to the idea that there are more senses than we have been able to map.
Yeah. Speaking of which, where are you in line to get the Neuralink?
I am going nowhere near that.
Nowhere near that. Come on. Oh man, I would love to. You talk about. I mean, I guess technically that is telepathy. Yeah. If you've got two people and you're both connected to the same Wi-Fi, you could just think thoughts back and forth.
Yeah, I'm worried that, they're just not testing it enough, and I wouldn't be on the first round or the second. I mean, I bought like an Apple Vision Pro, one of those VR headsets. I'm a techno geek and I play into all that stuff, but like having it actually implanted in my brain by the same guy who made the Cybertruck, I'm going to hold off on that for a little while.
Well, he's not physically doing it himself.
No, but he's paying the people that are, and I know he'll take some shortcuts.
Oh God, I don't know if you listen to Lex Friedman's podcast.
I do, yeah.
Did you listen to the one where he had the four guys, the head of the production of the actual hardware, the one that was like in charge of the medical, he was a physician, and the surgical implantation, a computer program, just went all the way down.
Yeah, I did, and I'm excited about it. I mean, it's a cool future. I'm just not going to be the early adopter on that one.
Yeah, we're going to wait till they work the kinks
out. Yeah.
All right, well, I'm going to get off that and circle back to the book. So what's even more horrifying is that Oksana seduces Lewis into feeding her living meat, beginning with his own finger. So where did the power of Oksana's seduction come from? Was it sexual in some way, or was she playing on some sort of latent paternal instinct in Lewis?
So that's a great question. And my answer would be it's both. It's definitely a bit of both. It's, there's something seductive about Oksana when she takes her full form. I mean, spoiler alert, she's not going to remain just a head for the rest of the novel. She's trying to get back the rest of herself, or
trying to get her groove back.
Exactly. Yeah. Some nasty approximation of what she is. So I kind of imagine this was her larval stage again. But it's also absolutely paternal. It's, I wouldn't say it's necessarily sexual at first, but there's definitely something sexual that develops with it. I think Lewis as a character, when he sort of came into existence in my head, to me was kind of a broken man who had just sort of been on the outskirts of society. He had kind of been talked down to, and he'd been down on his luck for a long time. And when you're kind of in that headspace, you probably are looking for something to take care of, whether it's a dog, whether it's another person, just to feel connected to the universe. And Oksana fed right into that. She got her little psychic claws into that need, and he was going to be a great errand boy for, the chunk of the journey that he's on.
Awesome. Well, as Oksana is fed, she begins to grow, almost as if the brain is a seed that transforms into a large living being the more it's nourished, as you were just alluding to. So growth and transformation can be a terrifying element of body horror. How did you approach writing the visceral details of the head's growth to keep the readers both horrified and intrigued? Because it was, I know you come from parents who were physicians, but it was a very, I wouldn't say methodical. It made sense in some aspects, but it had a lot of fantastical elements to it. I don't know. I'll let you explain.
Yeah, thanks. No, I appreciate that. And you did kind of touch on it when you said the brain is a seed, as, again, spoiler alert, but as she kind of starts regenerating, her bones start growing in these dendritic tentacles. She's essentially kind of like a tree, a seed that's kind of reaching out. And I would argue that, if you'd given her, enough time and enough, little bits of meat, she would start forming a skeletal structure. She would start filling that with the organs that she needed. Eventually, she would reconstitute herself if she had enough calories in. And this is kind of gross, but, calories in, calories out. If she just consumed enough matter, she would be able to fully regrow herself, for the sake of fiction and also for the sake of the story that we're telling. She takes some shortcuts in this regrowth process. She gets, meat from other places, if you will. But yeah, she would probably, kind of keep going down. And I researched, how the body works. And again, as speculative as I can be, I do try to base it in some sort of bit of science. What would she need? She would probably need her lungs. She'd need respiration. That would be one of the things that she would grow. She would keep, her heart, which she'd kind of kept up close to her throat in this gross little throat sac that she'd kind of grown. She would need a digestive system. Yeah. Sorry to use that word on this podcast. It's a word I never want to use again. But yeah, she would kind of reconstitute the necessary parts of her body, and then the unnecessary parts. It'd almost be like Deadpool growing back, but a lot more horrific.
Yeah. I'm calling in sick to work tomorrow. My throat sac is flared up.
Yep, there you go.
Well, as you alluded to, as far as meat, when Lewis has to search for more living meat for Oksana, he ends up running afoul of the law. And that's when Anwar's uncle, Graham Nolan, enters the story. So Graham is a former detective who retired to become an officer in the quiet countryside of Bristol County. His investigation into the disappearance of a resident's dog leads him to Lewis Harding's doorstep after the resident accuses Lewis of having something to do with the dog's disappearance. So you portray Graham as having the gut instinct of an old school, I guess, what do they call him? Gumshoe detective?
Sure, yeah.
Who didn't rely on technology. And in an era where detectives often rely on technology, what do you think makes an old school detective like Graham more effective or less effective when facing what appear to be supernatural events in your story?
So I know a few detectives, and I'm very fortunate to have actually interviewed some FBI special agents, and I count two of them as one who's a former special agent, and they are on my my beta reader team. So I can throw them a lot of questions. I don't throw them too many questions, and I do try to ask them these kind of questions specifically. What would you do in these situations? And, there's always that initial reaction with people like this who've been in law enforcement for a long time that, I would never deal with something like this. That would never happen. This is reality. And then once you kind of overcome that, like, okay, so now you found the severed head. What are you going to do with it? And it's still talking. They actually, give some great answers. But a lot of it does come back to instinct and training. Like, the expression, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall back on your training. And a lot of these investigators, a lot of people who are methodical. Like, it's not sexy. What they do on TV, that's a dramatized version of it. But a lot of it is just bullshit paperwork. And I don't know if I can say that word on your podcast. I apologize.
No,
a lot of it is just going and knocking on doors and asking questions and filling in forms. And again, it's not sexy and exciting, but that's really how cases do get solved. If you watch a movie like The Silence of the Lambs, like Jodie Foster catches the killer not by, some amazing discovery, but just by following up on questions and questioning other people who are questioned. And that's, what a lot of the people I've spoken to on this refer to it as sort of like an instinct, is just sort of their training after a while. It's not a sixth sense. It's not magical. It's just the pattern recognition that they've had when dealing with the public for 20 years. Liars come in a lot of stripes, but they follow certain patterns. And, a lot of detectives tend to be, really forthcoming about that.
Yeah, I didn't realize Dr. Phil used to be an interrogation specialist.
I didn't either. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Today I learned. That's why he's probably a good host.
Yeah, he was talking about how all the different ways he would suss out a lie. Like if somebody said that they weren't somewhere, he would say, well, what if I told you that I had proof on video that you were there?
And it's like, get them sweating.
Yeah, well, it's like, even if they know it's not true, if they're lying, they still, there's still like that uncertainty, like, wait a minute, am I forgetting something? Whereas if they're telling the truth, it's like, okay, show me. I'd love to see that,
That's interesting. There's a really good book I highly recommend by Gavin de Becker called The Gift of Fear. And Gavin de Becker runs like a security outfit right now. The guy's, I think, like a multi-billionaire at this point. But when he wrote this book, he's dealt with assault victims and rape victims and people like that throughout. And the book details the instincts that we have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to just kind of subconsciously look at patterns, the little things that kind of raise the hair on the back of our neck. These are things that detectives and people who spend a lot of time investigating things and looking for clues cultivate at a more conscious level. But we've all got that ability because we've all got here through, evolutionary chicanery and survival and whatnot. So yeah, The Gift of Fear, highly recommended. It's great if you want to write a book that's got people doing investigation, but also if you want to just understand those situations that you probably want to avoid and how to avoid them.
Yes, indeed. Well, circling back to the book, although I think I know the answer to this next question, which was, how did you approach writing a character like Graham, whose intuition is central to his investigative style, I imagine, interviewing those same people we were talking about? But were there any classic archetypes that you modeled him after?
So Graham, he kind of came to me as the kind of opposite of Jodie Foster in The Silence of the Lambs. And if I mention that book a lot, my readers know it's like my top 5, one of my top 5 favorite books. Probably my favorite book, but depends when you ask it. I reread it like once every 18 months.
Oh, wow.
So I kind of tried to imagine Jodie Foster's character as a male and kind of on the other side of it. Not an FBI special agent, but someone who could have gone that route, but just through life circumstances, through, a tragedy with his daughter and a divorce, has just kind of been channeled into, warming the desk and not doing much. He worked in a big city and he just kind of wants a quiet retirement. That was to me a person who did not want to be in the situation that he's in, but he's also the one in this community who has the skills to see that there's something weird going on, that there's, a missing dog, that there's a shady neighbor, that just all these little things that are happening throughout New England in 96, they might not be connected, but they warrant further inquiry. And that was, for me, kind of where Graham's character really came into my life. And I could kind of see him clearly in my mind's eye. And, this is going to sound really weird, but like I was watching the Naked Gun series and I was just, I just had in my mind, like, kind of an almost Leslie Nielsen version. But if Leslie Nielsen always played it straight in that series. Everything else around him was absolutely insane.
Slapstick, yeah.
but he played it straight, and he was so good at playing that straight man. So, that's going to disappoint some people that my mental image for Detective Nolan was kind of a younger, more grizzled Leslie Nielsen.
No, but I'm down with that. Oh, God. Well, Graham's instincts turn out to be correct, but he unfortunately lets his guard down, which allows Lewis and Oksana to go on the run. So Graham's mistake of letting his guard down is pivotal to the plot. Do you think human error and vulnerability are key elements in horror storytelling? And if so, how do you make these mistakes make characters more relatable or the stakes higher?
Yeah, so absolutely mistakes are 100% part of humanity. We're all humans and we all do make mistakes. I mean, there's so much evidence that doesn't get admitted into cases because a detective mismarked the evidence, or they didn't collect it, or there was some part of the process where the evidence could have possibly been tampered with or tainted. Someone didn't sign this thing in or out. So absolutely, mistakes happen all the time. And, detectives are human. Graham, at the beginning of the story, doesn't think that this is anything more than, a missing dog and a shady neighbor who might have accidentally hit it with his car or something like that. So yeah, he does let his guard down. And I think that horror relies upon people being human, being more human in a way, and embracing that humanity. I love Jack Reacher, and I watch, the Jack Reacher TV shows, and I've read most of those books, but Jack Reacher is a superhero in human form. And if he were in a horror book, there wouldn't be the drama or the tension as much, because he would be able to suss out what Pennywise's weakness was. He would be able to figure out the motivations. But yeah, absolutely. Human mistakes and weaknesses are something that are paramount to horror, because that's where the darkness creeps in. That's where the evil, really kind of twists that knife. And for Graham, it was trusting a guy that he's kind of known as the little town fuck up, and thinking that he, hadn't done something much worse than he had done.
Mm-hmm. Well, Lewis and Oksana are not running blind, however. Oksana has a destination in mind. And oddly enough, the place she leads him to is the literacy center of a college. And this question kind of has to do with, I want to get like a better idea of what her power, or what she's capable of, I should say. She has him look up a yearbook from 1994 and turn the pages until they come across a picture of her, which is Oksana Samorina. And for some reason, she's Ukrainian, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep, she's Ukrainian.
I don't know why I always think of her as like a different nationality with that name, but Oksana, yeah, that's definitely kind of an Eastern European. Mm-hmm. So Oksana begins scanning the pages with her eyes, seemingly absorbing information, and as she does, flashes of memories begin flowing through Lewis's mind. So was this view into her memories a byproduct of being connected to her, or was she actively manipulating them and, I guess, kind of getting back to what we were talking about as far as violating your mind?
So, again, boring answer to it, but it's a bit of both. It's absolutely, she needs to recall these things. She's been damaged. She's been traumatized. She's been at the bottom of a bay for roughly 2 years. And how she got there is a major part of the story. But her brain is damaged, and she's consumed a ton of her body in order to survive in this environment that, no human being should be able to survive. And in the process of that, a lot of her brain cells have probably deteriorated to the point that the memory is no longer being stored as accurately and well as it previously had. So in a way, she's kind of going to her backup hard drive. She's looking at other memories and triggering recall, in the way that, we might scan a UPC or a QR code and have further actions going. Now, Lewis, because he's connected to her by blood and, also emotionally connected to her, he gets a little bit of this mental splashback as well. And, just for the mechanics of storytelling, it's also kind of important that, the reader be able to understand what's happening. We can't be entirely in Oksana's head, but we also kind of need to be in Lewis's head. So, he's getting a little bit of that mental splashback as well. And they're definitely mentally connected. Mm-hmm. They're tethered to each other, and he's got pieces of her inside him that are compelling him in ways that, might be familiar to like, Dracula and Renfield and that kind of a situation.
Yeah. Well, the backstory to the story, in a manner of speaking, is an incident involving a group of friends in the yearbook photos, which were Megan, Adam, Desi, Tom, June, and Oksana. And I don't think I'm missing anybody, right?
Nope,
Yeah.
that's it.
So Megan's life was struck by tragedy when both of her parents died in a house fire, and she was later involved in a horrific car crash that nearly killed her and left her with a large scar on her face. Groups of friends often harbor secrets, especially in horror novels. So how do secrets and hidden truths play into the dynamics of this group?
So yeah, this group was split apart by a secret. Absolutely. It's no secret that in the novel they reference I Know What You Did Last Summer, which was also based on a book. I forget the name of the book, but it's not I Know What You Did Last Summer. At least I don't think it is. Friendships and secrets, splitting apart groups are as old as, the first written story, people betraying each other. And I knew that this group of friends, when the story started materializing in my brain, I knew that they were going to have something that split them apart. And I just had a vision in my head of them all together in a yearbook photo with just a little rip that was taking out Oksana as part of that photo. And, you might see part of her body, you might see a little kind of halo glow around the photo where it was taken. But for the most part, she's been kind of torn out of their life and they've drifted from each other. I mean, I'm in my mid-40s, and it's no secret that, by my age, I've drifted from most of my high school friends. These are people that I spent the most formative years of my life with. And yet, we maybe just text each other every now and then or shoot each other a message or like each other's, Facebook photos of their kids and grandkids. But I think it's absolutely one of the things that people can relate to, especially as we have gotten older. Those really raw feelings and emotions that we had when we were younger of those people that we were close with and how distant we've gotten. I knew that this story had to kind of have that trajectory of people starting to drift apart. And then the question becomes, why? Why did they drift apart? What was it that drifted them apart? And why does no one want to talk about Oksana?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you piqued my interest there with I Know What You Did Last Summer. I just thought that was like a standard screenplay. I did not know. Let's see here.
Yeah, let's find out. I think it was based on a book.
The film, it also draws inspiration from the urban legend known as The Hook, as well as the slasher film. Okay, but where is the book?
I think it's up in that first paragraph.
Oh, up here?
Yeah, underneath there. Based upon the 1973 novel by Lois Duncan.
Oh, by the same name?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe. Let's see.
You're seeing that here?
Yeah, I'm seeing that in the first paragraph right there, where I Know What You Did Last Summer is a 1997 American slasher film. Yeah, the book is titled I Know What You Did Last Summer by Lois Duncan, 1973 by Little Brown.
I see it. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
For some reason, I thought it was slightly different.
Huh.
A slightly different name, but yeah.
Okay.
I bought the book and I remember starting to read it and I never finished it.
Yeah, I remember the movie. I think I saw it in the theater.
Yep.
I had a thing for Jennifer Love Hewitt.
Oh yeah, who didn't? She was America's sweetheart. Yeah, her and Neve Campbell.
Yeah. Well, the individual friends began experiencing strange visions and hallucinations, which seemed to bring them together due to their shared affliction. Are these visions manifestations of guilt, fear, or trauma? And do their reactions reveal anything deeper about the characters' personalities or pasts?
Yeah, I think, again, they think they're part of everything. It depends on each character. For some of them, they've really repressed this emotion and become new people entirely. Like one character, Chuni, goes by the name of June now. It's no secret that she had a really rough time in her high school at this boarding school that the kids were at. And so she kind of rebranded herself. Another character, Adam, is supposedly, had this bucolic time at at a college, and he's gone to an Ivy League and he's been very successful, or that's what you think. Mm-hmm. Desi and Tom, this brought them a little closer, actually. This, whatever happened that split this group apart, somehow bonded them. It became the kind of the cement and the binding, and to the point that, Tom is thinking about asking Desi to marry him. He's got a ring in his pocket, even though, he's of a certain socioeconomic strata and she is much higher. He might be reaching, at least from his perspective. But yeah, absolutely. It manifests in a lot of different ways. And I think most of all for Megan, who's had brain damage, it manifests as an artist as well. It manifests very visually. She's at an art show and she starts noticing severed heads. Judith beheading Holofernes is one of my favorite subjects for a painting. And as an art school wannabe myself, that was a really fun scene to write. But she's looking at these different severed heads, and that's almost triggering a memory that she's buried, that she's repressed, that's been ripped right out of her head because of brain trauma. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, speaking of her artistic inclinations, I wanted to ask you about that scene where she's been approved by whatever that board was to come back to the school, the art school, but she has to kind of, I don't know, get the blessing of the dean. That was the dean, right?
Yeah, one of the big luminaries in the department.
Yeah, and I thought the interaction was going to be her and this stuffy academic that, just wanted to lord his power over her, something like that. But honestly, his explanation of where she was with her art, I was like, yeah. My God, that's some pretty solid advice. I mean, it sucks for her, but it made sense. So, where did you kind of get the idea for that? I know it's a kind of an easy question. What was your inspiration for this? I could just ask you the inspiration for this all night long, but I would like to know the inspiration for that.
Yeah. So the truth of it is I was in art school, wannabe. I spent, most of my high school time painting and doing a bunch of paintings. I did go to a private boarding school, and at the end of the year, I got to paint this whole area of the hall. And I don't know if it's there anymore. This was 20 something years ago. But I didn't really have what it takes to go to the next level. And I got into a couple of art schools, and I spent the summer kind of debating whether I was going to go to art school or whether I wasn't. And I got some really good advice from someone who just said, look, what you're doing is it's imitation, and it's nice. And you're imitating other things. And it was advice that I needed, but not advice that I wanted. And I did not end up going to art school because of that. And I think that was a good decision. Creatives, we all start by imitating things. That's how anyone, take a little kid and have them write a story. They're just going to write a story that's very similar to a story that they've heard someone else say. They're not going to create something wholly original, but then they're going to start iterating and changing it. And Megan was at that phase of her artistic development where she needed something else. And part of the thing that was blocking her is just these psychological issues that we all have, but that she hadn't quite addressed. And I'm glad you thought that the dean was a nice guy, because he was he was a real prick, but he was a nice guy, and he came from the heart, and he was saying what you needed to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, she comes to the conclusion that what's holding her back is, I guess, the unresolved processing of the trauma. Because not only did she not process it, she couldn't process it because she didn't really remember any of it.
Exactly.
So her unresolved trauma impacts both her personal and her artistic life. So how did you weave these two aspects of her identity together? And how does the novel explore the ways in which trauma can shape or even distort a person's sense of self?
Yeah, so I actually had a head injury in college. I have a scar. It's a little hard to see, but I do have a scar that goes through my eyebrow right there. It's about, I think it was 8 to 10 stitches or something like that. And it, we were talking about memory a little bit earlier, but it plays into memory because I received this head wound in 1999, and 3 people have different stories of how I got it. I was at a fraternity party. I was either couch surfing down the stairs on a couch. I either fell off of a balcony, or I got hit in the head. And I'll tell you what I remember. I remember carrying a glass of wine in each hand and opening a door. and the door smacking me in the head because I was trying to push it down just a little bit. And a person pushed through the door and then they said sorry. And I don't remember much more after that other than walking around and talking to people. And after that, it's just an 18-hour blank of my life. And I don't really know what happened to me that night. Megan's attempt to sort of like process her trauma, it to me was a way to kind of like work out that blank spot in my own life. It was a way to really kind of just think about, memory and how memory can kind of, or lack of memory can actually, change our perception of ourself. And for me, there was a time after the incident where I was really kind of struggling to figure out what had happened. Because I woke up in a hospital. My forehead was stitched. They wouldn't let me go home because they were concerned that I had a concussion, which I did have. They didn't want me to go to sleep. So someone was sitting there with me. There was a woman in the bed, the other bed in the room with me, who had gotten, in a really bad altercation with her husband, and he had laid her out pretty bad. And I guess we had been talking, and I had been very sympathetic to her. I remember none of that, but she gave me a hug when we left, and we had apparently had all sorts of interactions that I just can't recall.
You're
so
even a nice guy when you're not aware of it.
I guess. Yeah. So there's a whole chunk of my life, 18 hours that I just can't account for. And the fact that my friends can't account for what did this to me either has always bothered me. I mean, I'm going to take it to the grave. And, people say, like, I'm positive he was stair surfing. He was couch surfing down the stairs.
Hold my beer.
Exactly, like a hold my beer. And if that was what it was, I wouldn't be bothered with it, except that I have such a specific memory of getting hit by a door. And that others have said, no, he was not stair surfing. That was someone else. That was not Andrew or Andy or Drew or whatever I went by at the time. He was not stair surfing. He fell out of this thing. And others are like, no, that wasn't him either. So yeah, whatever the hell happened, it's going to remain a mystery.
Did you write before the head injury or only after? The reason the reason I ask is because Merrill David, I don't think he suffered a head injury, but I think he had some sort of like an aneurysm or something. So he had to have his head operated on. He said after that, and Merrill, if I got it wrong, I'm sorry, but something to that effect. He started writing after that. Now he just writes like a fiend. I mean, he just pushes them out.
That's so neat.
And Chuck Palahniuk, he was assaulted, knocked unconscious, I believe, skull fracture.
Wow.
And that's when he started writing. Yeah, it's crazy. So
yeah,
that's why I asked.
I've been writing ever since, second grade and third grade. I had a teacher in third grade who passed away recently, but literally kept one of the original short stories that I wrote. And I found it among his things at his estate when he passed. It was really sweet. So I've been writing my whole life. It's just sort of been a way to process reality and kind of understand the world. But no, it definitely was a way to process. This story was a way to process that blank in my mind from that time. And there's, that's another reason why it was set in the 90s too, is because I was able to really kind of relate to that time in, my life. And, when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, it's a formative chunk of emotions that you've got boiling up in your chest.
Yeah. Yeah. You're, so it's interesting that you kind of, you have personal experience with kind of the foundation of a lot of the things that happened to her. Your novel is incredibly psychological and blurs the lines of reality to the point that the reader loses touch with reality just as much as the characters themselves. So I was curious to know, did the same thing happen to you while you were writing it? Was it hard to keep a grip on the plot progression?
So it's always hard for me to triangulate reality. That's just kind of like my default operating system in the world.
Stay away from hallucinogens.
Well, I've gone down that path a few times. So yeah. We can talk about that too. It is the Dark Mind podcast.
Yes.
So yeah, I think to answer that question, I think I'm always, and I think many creatives are kind of flirting up with the border of, and I don't want to call it mental illness, but the border of sanity and the blurring door of perception, as Aldous Huxley called it. And I think, sometimes we go a little too far into it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I essentially, as a writer, I spend most of my day hallucinating ideas and then trying to put them into words and then trying to arrange those words into paragraphs and a story that makes sense. But it all starts as a hallucination and as feelings and things like that. So I do feel that like I'm always kind of, staring into the abyss and hoping the abyss won't stare back into me and that I won't teeter over into it. But, with this book, absolutely, there were a lot of times where the psychological aspect of Megan's brain damage, the psychological aspect of what did or didn't happen, repressed memories, those things, I wonder about my own memory of things in the 90s. And it was unsettling to look up certain facts that I knew for a fact that I would have bet money on happened in like 1992 or 1994 and find out that they were like, oh, that was 96 or that was like 98. Like Elian Gonzalez. I don't know if people remember Elian Gonzalez, but he was that kid who was taken from his family. And it was, I swore that was like around the time that OJ happened. It was in the late 90s. It was like 99, if I'm not mistaken.
OJ was 86. I remember that specifically because I remember I was 6 years old.
OJ was in 92.
Was
when
it?
He did the Bronco? Yes, when he escaped.
No shit.
I think it was 92 or 93. We can double check that. Double check that on this. But it was in the early 90s.
I could have sworn it was 86. Let's see. OJ.
Yeah, because he was in the first two Naked Gun movies. And I remember that the third movie, I don't think they had him in there. And I think they just kind of made a passing reference to how he wasn't available. He was off somewhere else.
You know what? 86 was the Challenger. That's what it was.
Yes.
The Challenger. Yeah. Yep. My bad.
Yep.
Let's see here.
Yeah, the Challenger. I remember that too. And I was in kindergarten when that happened and we saw it explode. And then the TV got wheeled out of the room and it was just like, okay, kids, let's just go. And, we'll have recess a little early and we'll chat about those things.
Let's see. Yeah. Early life career. Oh, well. Okay. 1980s, 1990s. Where's the, legal history.
Arrest for murder. 94. Look at that.
94. Yep. Okay. Really? I didn't think I was that old. I remember.
I know. It scares me, man.
That's that memory thing you're talking about. Yep. This is, oh God, I don't like it.
Yeah. And we'll put away a person for murder based upon the testimony of one person.
Yeah.
Who's absolutely convinced it was the guy in the red hat at the Taco Bell who shot up the place. And, the guy never wore hats in his life, but yeah. Yeah, memory is fascinating and scary when you really dig down into it and how it constitutes our reality, the whole world around us. And when you start kind of chipping away at that, I mean, I write cosmic horror, and so I love going into that existential dread. But man, sometimes I wish it didn't come back with me.
Yeah, I mean, a very, I guess this isn't really analogous to memory, but one thing that I used to love to do in school was the, what did they call it? The phone game where you would
Telephone.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. By the time it got to the last person, it was completely different.
Absolutely. And if everyone just changes one thing or puts an inflection in the wrong place or a little, a comma or a pause, absolutely, the entire message can change.
Well, if your novel were to be adapted into another medium like film or a series, how do you think these psychological horror elements would translate visually or narratively?
Man, that's a really good question. So I come from the world of screenwriting originally. My undergrad degree is in screenwriting, and I had an agent and did a lot of film stuff in the early to mid 2000s. And I don't know how I would have adapted my own book. And that's one of the reasons why I like working in books more than screenplays. Screenplays are very, third person present tense. You're not stepping on the director's toes. Whereas books, you are the director. You can talk about all the senses. It's very close to telepathy itself, a book. A screenplay is much more of a scaffold for everyone else to run off of. So I don't know how to answer your question. I would hope that someone like David Cronenberg or someone who's David Cronenberg adjacent would have fun with the body horror of it. I would hope that it could be on a network like HBO or Netflix or something like that could give it the breathing room that I think the story requires. So I think it's a little bit longer than, 90 minutes. I think it would make a great, limited series, 6 episodes, an hour each. You have the big finale in episode 5 and 6, or the big revelation in episode 5 and the big finale in episode 6. And, everyone goes their separate ways. Like the guy who did Chernobyl and is now doing The Last of Us, Craig Mazin, he seems to really kind of get that. God, if we're just speculating and dreaming, I'd love to have, the director who did The Haunting of Hill House, and Dr. Sleep take a stab at it. Half of the A24 alumni would be amazing to do it as well. But at the end of the day, it would just be something that I would kind of have to let go of that process and really trust that everyone knows what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, speculative horror often flirts with the supernatural, even in a world built on science. And in your novel, it didn't seem like it was anything supernatural per se, but the science was taken pretty far, like not supernatural, but more like supernormal. So do you prefer fantastical elements built on a scientific premise over, just something purely supernatural? And not being familiar with your previous work, is that a theme you tend to maintain?
So that's a really good question. And I think as a horror author, I tend to go more towards the supernatural, the paranormal, that kind of thing. I think for every story, it's a different angle. And this one tends to be a little bit more, I'm going to use air quotes, scientifically based than some of my other ones. By the Light of Dead Stars, the first book in my cosmic horror series really is about a cosmic horror entity. It's not scientifically explained. It's beyond the explainable. Whereas I've got a techno thriller series. The first book in that is Blindsight. And that kind of starts with like astral projection being weaponized. And it's really just quantum entanglement. And we're able to basically, entangle two photons. And that's essentially our mind and body being able to separate and affect change over a distance is not necessarily psychokinesis or telekinesis, but a form of quantum entanglement. Again, these are all like the realm of the speculative. Like no one's going to write a paper and actually get it published based upon like any of the research that I'm doing for this. But
this is not a TED Talk, people.
Exactly. Yeah. But I do try to start from a place where it is semi-believable, whether it's the science, whether it's the characters. And I tend to be a skeptic in real life. If you're going to come to me and you're going to say like my house is haunted, I'm going to say, what evidence do you have of that? I'm going to be really excited and my writer brain is going to start taking notes and I'm going to like ask you a million questions. But if your only evidence is like, well, the light turns on and off, I'm going to be like, man, I've got faulty wiring in my house. Like, knob and tube does crazy things when you plug something in a different room and it's on the same circuit. So yeah, I think, I try to approach it from a scientific perspective, but I also try to like kind of balance the skeptic brain. And my characters tend to be skeptical. But a lot of horror is like overcoming the skepticism.
Well, you answered my next question because I was going to ask, have you ever written a book with a premise based on quantum physics? So obviously you have.
Yep.
Did you have to add a lot of fantastical elements to it? Because quantum physics is fantastical enough by itself. It gets to a certain point when you're discussing quantum physics where it's like, you can't tell where the solid science ends and where the ramblings of a stone person begin, you don't know at what point that begins because it sounds like the ramblings of a high person. You're like, what are you saying? Like,
yeah, absolutely. And it depends who explains it to you too. If you've got Sean Carroll, he can couch it in really interesting stuff. If you've got, Michio Kaku, he can kind of give you some really neat examples. And then, you get the ancient pyramids guy who just takes it into the realm of the fantastical. God. And you're like, okay, you're not doing anyone a service there, but it's really fun. So I had to dig in a lot. I went to a lot of, lectures. I actually got to work with the FBI. They have a branch called the IPPAU that lets you, pairs you up with a special agent and you go through a vetting process, but then you can actually interact and ask them questions. And that was a really fun process. It's called the FBI's IPPAU. It's basically like their PR firm. And they just want to they're happy to fact check stuff. So you don't get like a story where an FBI agent comes into a town and is like, we're taking over this investigation, because that's not what happens. The FBI doesn't do stuff like that. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
The FBI. How can screenwriters, authors, and producers? Yeah, yep, that's great. They're really cool. They're very helpful. There's also some groups that will link you up with scientific advisors. And the great thing about this is, though, is these kind of things, like there are a lot of people out there who are tired of seeing like the FBI or investigators or other things represented poorly on screen. And, if I spend a lot of time researching how severed head is going to rebuild itself through, bones that'll grow out like tendrils, I also kind of want to get the investigative part of my story at least as right as I can. Mm-hmm. So, it takes me a long time to write books. I tend to be a lot slower than the average writer, but I do try to do a lot of research. Even if 85% of it doesn't end out there, it's like the iceberg. Readers see that 15% that's above water. And ideally, it makes the characters at least a little more believable. And it can lead to some really fun moments, like Graham getting the fingerprints in Head Like a Hole. How is he getting this one woman's fingerprints in another place? And the only explanation being kind of that woo-woo crazy science explanation. But he was a skeptic at the beginning of the story, but now he's starting to become one of the converted.
What was, Interstellar. That's what it was.
Yeah.
I was going to say that I like really technically accurate work. And I know at a certain point, if you're reading a horror book or watching a horror movie, the suspension of disbelief comes into play at some point.
Absolutely.
But so some people might, think that my love of this hardcore technical accuracy is kind of counterproductive to being entertained. But Interstellar, I had a friend who is an engineer, and I'm not intelligent enough to understand it like he did, but I remember that's what he said about that movie. He's like, I watched that entire movie through a couple of times, and honestly, the math and the science is pretty sound.
Yeah. Kip Thorne is the physicist that actually advised on that, and he ended up writing some papers, and I think they won some major award for the way that light disperses around a black hole. If you actually look at, the black hole in the movie, how it creates what I think are called accretion disks. That was kind of, it was a new visualization, if I'm not mistaken, of an idea that they had understood. But your physicist friend is saying, the mathematics on it blew people's minds away because it was a brand new representation of something. And if I'm not mistaken, Kip Thorne actually got a lot of praise for that. And the Nolan brothers were their movie was better for incorporating as much of that while still going into the speculative. I mean, at the end of the day, love is a form of gravity that's traveling across time, and they're able to connect each other. That's the woo-woo part of the story. But if you get to that, by that point of the story, hopefully you've bought into it. Yeah, there you go. The Science of Interstellar. Kip Thorne.
I haven't heard about this before. Well, you talk about black holes. I'm surprised. You remember when they first built the Hadron Collider at CERN? Yep. Everybody's like, they're going to open up a black hole and suck the Earth in.
Or there were some mistakes that were happening, and they were like, these are time travelers coming back to actually make sure that the event horizon doesn't happen, suck the world in or whatnot.
Yeah. Oh, that's crazy. And they don't help matters by having a statue of Shiva out front of their main headquarters. Shiva the Destroyer, stop it.
Yeah. It's like when you look at the back of our money and there's actually all these weird symbols on it, and you start asking why do we have this? It's kind of boring, honestly. The explanation is not as exciting as the Da Vinci Code and, our creative brains can come up with. But yeah, I agree.
I was watching part 2 of Nate Bargatze's little skit that he does on Saturday Night Live, where he plays George Washington, and he's talking about
that was great.
Have you seen part 2?
I've seen part 1 and part 2. Yeah, part 2 is the one where they're in the boat, right? They're coming over.
Yeah, and he's talking about, and if you deem me worthy, put me on the front of a dollar bill. Oh, well, what will we put on the back? Everything.
Everything else. There. It's really weird.
Latin words, particles, a pyramid with a floating eye. Oh, that was funny. Well, let's see here. Were there specific works of fiction, scientific theories, or real-world events that inspired the premise of your novel? I know you've had some issues with a traumatic event with some memory loss. What was the other thing? Oh, the art school.
Yep.
Having kind of that come to Jesus meeting with who was it, by the way? Was it the dean?
I believe it was. Yeah,
Okay.
I'd have to go back and check. If not the dean, it was one of the heads of the department. Usually, and I went and got my master's and kind of swam with some of these academics. I taught in high school and college for about 15 years, and so usually there's little fiefdoms. There's different cliques and power that form in any sort of group. But yeah, I believe it was the dean. I'd have to double check that though.
Okay. Well, I guess those two elements are enough to kind of inject into the story. Well, have any readers contacted you asking about, because the progression, the characters, the interactions are so surreal. At some points, it's like, okay, wait a minute, what's really happening right now? Have any of the readers contacted you and asking you about like particular elements of the story? Are they real, imagine, psychological manipulation? Like, I guess if it won't induce any spoilers, what parts?
Yeah, so absolutely. A lot of readers, how much of what happens with Anwar is real versus how much is in his head. How much of what Megan happened. If this novel is essentially Megan telling a story to Anwar, how much is Megan being honest about it? Is she lying about everything? You have to kind of triangulate her knowledge with what Anwar perceives in the present. And then the rest of the book is essentially an extended flashback. So how many cards is Megan holding close to her chest is a question. And that always fascinates me because, so much of the truth is also how much you leave out, how much you don't talk about something or what you don't say. Investigators, one of the investigators I interviewed for Blindsight talked about the void. And the void, not in a cosmic horror sense, but the void in a conversation when you're talking around something that someone doesn't want to actually talk about. They'll have to kind of you'll figure out where the void is through questions that kind of abut to the edge of it, but don't directly ask it, because that's generally where people tend to shut down. So a lot of readers have asked me a lot of excellent questions about the nature of reality and perception and what in the book really did happen versus what was, something that Megan made up or misremembered. Again, this is all taking place within about 2 years of a person having a major head trauma and, their friend group breaking up and playing telephone, back and then remembering it, from, 20 something years later. I mean, my memory of 1996 isn't that sharp, or at least it's not as sharp as I would like it to be.
Yeah, between Megan and Oksana, you've got reality being attenuated from two different angles,
Yeah, absolutely. And as a reader, you kind of have to fill in those blanks, and you have to be willing to. You have to be willing to do a lot of the work. And I guess that's what excited me about this book, is that I'm not going to give you those answers. Whatever answer you come up with, I hope that it's satisfying. And, you might just have to kind of do the mental work. David Lynch with Mulholland Drive, he's going to make a movie. It's 100%. And then he's going to take out 20% and leave you with 80%. And that 80% that you've got is hopefully those questions are as fascinating and interesting and they're worth pursuing.
Gotcha. Well, it was a great book, great novel. Listeners at home, buy it, read it, and review it. And you have a more recent book entitled The Tides of Darkness, which is book 2 of a series. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the series is called Beyond the Lost Coast. It's set on the Lost Coast region of Northern California, which is a region that got that name because it was just too rugged and untamed for the Federal Highway Project to come through. So if you look from Canada to, Mexico, there's the Interstate 1 that just goes all along the West Coast, but they hit this one rocky region in California called the Lost Coast, and they just couldn't do it. So they kind of skirted around it. And it's a beautiful, absolutely gorgeous part of California. I encourage everyone to go to. George Lucas shot Return of the Jedi there with the redwoods and the Ewoks. It is absolutely beautiful. And if there's one place on this planet, and I've been to a lot of places on this planet, if there's one place that I'm certain this reality abuts up against some other reality, it's the Lost Coast. So it felt like a perfect setting for a bit of cosmic horror in a small star-haunted town. And it's about two characters, a 14-year-old girl named Zelda who loses everything in her life. Her parents die in a car crash and she's injured. And we're doing car crashes a lot in my books. And her uncle, 40-something-year-old bachelor who's living in Spain and is just happy kind of living, a carefree life, and he becomes her caretaker. And the two of them come together and they move to this town called Greywood Bay, which has been a town that's been in several of my books as sort of a fictional place. It's kind of like Stephen King's Derry, Maine. And yeah, they uncover cosmic hauntings and little horrors and whatnot. And it's, By the Light of Dead Stars is the first book in the series. Tides of Darkness is the second, just came out. And today, the audiobook was actually just released. So if you like listening to audiobooks, I highly recommend it. I've got the same narrator for all my audiobooks. He's incredible. And he just did a bang-up job with this latest book. He does great, but this one, man, I was crying a few times reading it. And these are my words. I know them well. But the way he brought it to life was stunning.
Interesting. And I'm sorry to backtrack just a little bit. When you were talking, what was the name of the area? The
Lost Coast.
And how did you describe it again?
So it is an area of California. It's north of San Francisco, maybe about 150 miles north of San Francisco to almost the Oregon border. And if you were to go along the ocean, you would notice that you can drive most of the Lost Coast, but the major highways kind of skirt around this area, because quite simply, when they were doing the federal project to build highways north and south and east and west, this one region was just too rocky, too inhospitable, and it's kind of become synonymous with like hippies who left from San Francisco in the 60s, a lot of the back to land movement, which were people who just kind of wanted farmsteads and things like that. It's a really beautiful and bucolic area of California, but it's not without its problems as well. And it just seemed like a gorgeous place. It's beautiful to visit. Highly recommend it.
Okay. I thought I remembered you saying something to the effect of like it's like a breaching point where you can tell like, hey, this is almost like some Graham Hancock type.
Yes.
Is that what you were talking about?
That is exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay. Gotcha.
Like I said, I haven't experienced any hauntings in my life, but the writer brain in me, when I'm out there, like the sunsets are just a little more spectacular. The ocean just drifts out a little bit more. There's a vibe, there's an energy, and it feels like people out there kind of know it too, and it attracts a certain kind of people.
Okay.
But that there's just also kind of when the sun goes down, that sunset, you're just kind of wondering if there's something behind it for just a moment, whether it's a green flash, whether it's, the shadow of a shipwreck from 400 years ago that was, Spanish explorers, whether, it was natives people, whatever. There's just something in that area that is slightly surreal in the best and kind of slightly creepiest ways.
Gotcha. Well, fear is central to horror writing. So how do you decide what kind of fear to explore in your stories, whether that's the fear of the unknown, psychological terror, existential dread? What's your process, and do you find yourself returning to certain types of fear?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So like you mentioned, the fear of the unknown, to me, Lovecraft put it really eloquently, that it's one of the most ancient fears that we have. What is in that shadowed cave? What is that noise murmuring in the deep? Our imagination can fill those things with all sorts of monsters and boogeymen, and we've been doing it since the beginning of time. So that is what really fascinates me. It's the void. It's that area where we don't know. And the things that frighten me tend to be the things that aren't well trodden. And, The Exorcist 50 years ago was absolutely terrifying, seeing a little girl's head turn around and the bed shake. But we've seen so many exorcists that when, the girl's face turns green and she starts speaking Latin backwards, we know that they're going to call a priest and, whatever other holy men, and they're going to recite out of a Bible. And at some point, the power of Christ will compel them and they'll win the day. So the
it
things
will
that
compel you.
Yeah. So the things that don't scare me tend to be like, Ouija boards, religious horror that's very steeped in one religion being the answer. is, I think our world tends to be a little bit bigger than that at this point. Things that have an easy explanation. Something like the Babadook did scare me because, like, what was this thing? We never quite figure out. Is it a manifestation of the trauma? Is it a manifestation? Did the kid will it in? And I've only seen the movie, I think, twice. So I can't tell you as much as someone who's watched it 10 times. But that to me is absolutely terrifying. Things like that. Also things with, a slight scientific bend that are out of our kind of current understanding of science, but might be scientifically adjacent. Just like there's so much stuff in the ocean that we have not figured out yet. Yeah. And that lives on our planet. And we still have no idea what are in some of these deep, dark trenches. So that to me is fantastic. We find these molecules, these cellular organisms that can breathe, I think it was arsenic or methane that are living on these like lava tubes and everything that basically process things in ways that are absolutely alien to the rest of us. And that to me is fascinating. And that, when my brain starts kind of thinking about like, wow, there's this crazy organism on our planet that is like more alien than ET. What can we do with that? Like, how can we do that? What if someone ate it? What if someone drank it? What if someone like willingly injected it? And I tend not to think, in the idea of like, oh, it's going to give them superpowers like Spider-Man. But like, what are going to be the real repercussions of that?
Yeah, one of my biggest fears would be to, whether by plane or by boat, somehow get into some sort of altercation where I had to float in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah, and you're drifting over the Mariana Trench and, there's nothing between you and 30,000, 35,000 feet except a bunch of dead falling whales that are rotting and all the creatures that are going to eat on that. Yeah, that's nightmare fuel. Absolutely.
Ooh, yeah, and I think the ocean, the dark deep is a perfect analogy for like the unconscious mind.
Oh, perfect.
Like,
yeah.
Just, what kind of shadow self beast is lurking underneath.
Oh, yeah. Because, we all love water and we all have come from water. We crawled out of it, but like it's still dangerous. It'll still kill us. And at some point, we can be the best swimmer in the world. But at some point, if we're just out floating in that ocean, you're going to get exhausted. And at some point, you're going to get so exhausted, you're going to float down there. And, in your last seconds of conscious thought, you're going to be wondering what is underneath you. It's absolutely terrifying to me, too. It's why I try to process my fear through my fiction.
Yeah. If you go without water, you'll die. If you get submerged in water, you'll die.
Yep. Yeah. We just got to find that Goldilocks zone where we've got just enough to be comfortable, but not enough to drown us.
Well, how important is feedback in your writing process, especially from beta readers? What kind of reactions do you look for to gauge if the horror is hitting the mark?
Yeah, feedback is really important. I would say that, I've written about 7 books at this point. So I think feedback is a little bit more instinctual at this point for me. I do, sort of mentor some early writers, and I do encourage them to use beta readers. I think that some beginning writers make the mistake of listening to all the feedback and trying to write something by committee. And you can see this happen in writing groups a lot too, is basically they will take all the feedback of 8 or 10 or 12 people that they gave them on the first chapter of their novel, and they will try to rewrite to please 8 or 10 or 12 people. And what you'll end out having is something that is just a simulacrum of you're just trying to please the wrong people. You should be going for the readers that you are aligned with. And no one knows the readers that you're aligned with better than you and the books that you read growing up. So look at those. Stephen King, I always kind of quote him. Clive Barker is another big one. Joe Hill. There's a lot of different authors that I sort of use as like my lighthouse authors. And I do try to kind of like not just look at my books in terms of how it holds up to them, but also, some of their earlier works and their trajectory as they went forward. And so I think, beta readers can be helpful for figuring out if you're on that trajectory. I do think that, if you've got to tread lightly with beta readers, because some beta readers absolutely want to critique everything in your story, and others can just be really focused on one area. So my beta readers tend to be like, I have big picture beta readers, and then I have like specific scene beta readers. And some of my specific scene beta readers are just like, did I get the logistics of the FBI and the SWAT team breaking down this door and doing going into this room? Like when they roll on call out to like smash in a door, did they go in the right way? Should they cross or should they button hook? Like, how do they go into the room? And those beta readers tend to be absolutely invaluable because they can give you the specifics of a scene and then get out of the rest of the story. And they can help make a scene be incredible. The ones that are the big picture ones tend to also be really valuable because they kind of see the connective tissue between scene to scene to scene. And, if you're writing for, a year and a half like I am, at some point you kind of do lose a little bit of context and you get a little precious with your words. And those beta readers can also be really helpful. But knowing what their strengths are and what they're interested in is a major part of, going from a writer who's trying to write a book to a writer who's written a book that they are going to publish.
Okay. Well, kind of sliding away from writing a little bit. I know you do some live streaming. Gaming is one of them, right?
Yeah, we're testing out live streaming. Honestly, I would say do with air quotes around it. Okay. I play video games on Facebook and Twitch and YouTube a couple times a week. I gather with Andrew Nyberg and some others. And then I also just play some games with my wife and then, with my readers as well, occasionally.
Okay. So wasn't there something else or is it just gaming?
For now, it's just gaming.
Okay.
Yeah. And sometimes we do like a little Q&A and ask me anything. I'm, trying to get a little bit more onto the video side of social media rather than just, throwing up a post on Facebook because those are really nice, but I actually like conversing and having long form conversations. And, this is a perfect example of something that, you can't really do when you're just, throwing up a post on Facebook and, this is my dinner that I ate this night. What do you guys think? What are you eating for dinner?
Yeah.
We can really kind of roll up our sleeves and get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned your wife. Has she produced a dubstep track yet, or
she is not? No. She will. She's just getting started. And thank you, by the way, for that link.
Okay.
Yeah, she's just getting started on this. She is. If I like music, she is an absolute music enthusiast. I mean, she took me to a Skinny Puppy concert last year. She is tuned in, like it is part of her DNA. Whereas I enjoy it. She can tell you like why this music sounds good, why it makes sense. She gets the mathematics behind it, and I don't. And she's having a lot of fun learning how to produce electronic music. But I haven't been fortunate enough to really hear anything she's created yet. She keeps it really close to her sleeve.
I've always, had it in my mind that I wanted to do that. I actually wanted to learn Cubase.
Oh yeah.
But God, I'm so like swamped with the show. Like I just don't have time to focus my energy on anything else. But one of these days,
and that becomes the currency as you get older too, is like the time. Do you have the time to invest it? Like, I don't know if it's 10,000 hours or not, but it does feel like it's 10,000 hours.
Yeah. I'm working on mastery. I'm working on 10 years or 10,000 hours, and I'll probably reach 10,000 hours before 10 years.
Nice.
It's pretty obsessive. My wife is the same way. She's actually putting together a website that calculates like real complicated statistical analyses. Like people would normally use a like SPSS. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's a I have no idea. It's meant for high level analysis, especially with like testing and the demographics involved. Yeah. So, I mean, and she's just as obsessed with that as I am with this. So,
yeah. And you kind of have to be. I mean, if you want to get good at something, it's got to be, a little bit of a manic compulsion at the end of the day. So, I don't know how this stream is going to go that I'm doing. I'm just doing it to like play video games because I also tend to be one of those all gas, no breaks people. And I need a break at the end of the day to actually wind down, or else I will keep writing all the way up to when I fall asleep, which is what I did yesterday. I was writing my newsletter to my subscribers last night in bed. And at some point, like, you just got to have fun, put up your feet. And this stream is an excuse for me to do that and to play some video games.
Gotcha. Well, I will not monopolize any more of your time. I just have one more question. What is the life of Andrew Van Wey like outside of writing and streaming?
So I'm a very boring person, honestly.
Right.
I mountain bike.
That sounds boring.
Yeah, well, I don't mountain bike well.
Oh, okay.
I don't mountain bike very well. I've got a giant Old English sheepdog that's asleep behind me, and we adopted him about 1.5 years ago. So I'm a dog lover, dog nut. I am into fountain pens. I collect and write with fountain pens. So I don't know, you can't really see behind me, but I've got all sorts of inks and bottles back there.
You mean you write your books?
I do. I write my first drafts with longhand.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So I've got a bunch of little fountain pens right here, that I write my books with and whatnot.
Any Mont Blancs?
I do. Yeah. Actually, the one that I just showed you. Yeah,
that's a Mont Blanc? It is. Yeah, it is.
This was actually a gift to me from a German friend. So it's it's from the 90s, actually. And you probably can't see it, but it's got their name on it. But a woman that I know, her husband bought this in the late 90s, and he passed away, unfortunately, from a heart attack, kind of way too young. And about 1 year ago, she was cleaning out his desk, and she found this, and she knew that I was into fountain pens. So she was like, it's got gunk in it from like the late 90s. But she sent it to me. I sent it to a person who kind of fixed it and flushed it out and tuned it and everything. So yeah, I can talk. That's like my energy vampire skill is I can talk about inks and paper and fountain pens and all that stuff.
I've interviewed people that do their first drafts on the mechanical typewriters, which I think is awesome. But and fountain pen, that's pretty sick. I like that. That's pretty.
It's really dangerous though. You got it because you can lose all of that stuff. So you have to take photos of it. And that's what I do at the end of the day is usually if I get like 10 or 15 pages, I just start scanning them because I have lost pages. But I've been writing my first drafts longhand since about 2018. And I just find the process to be incredibly therapeutic. There's no Facebook, there's no notifications on a piece of blank paper. Mm-hmm. It gets you in a completely different flow zone and you treat your words differently. You just notice a different flow to your linguistics and your word choice and everything when you're actually making them by hand. And it got to the point where actually, when I was teaching English back in the day, I would have my students try a couple times of the semester, doing a low stakes assignment where they just wrote by hand. And it was always something that they resisted, especially like the freshmen and sophomores in college. They were always like, dude, I've got a computer. I'm not, $100,000 in college debt to do this. But it was always one of the things that at the end of the semester on my reviews, I would ask like, what were your favorite things? And it was like writing by hand was one of the best things of the semester. So nice. Yeah, I'm a big fan of it.
Sweet. All righty. Well, Andrew, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
Likewise, Vincent. This was a lot of fun. You asked some great questions. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Anytime. So as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug or let your readers and viewers know about?
Yeah, sure. My latest book, Tides of Darkness, book 2 in the Beyond the Lost Coast series, came out on Audible today. So if you are interested in that and you have read the first book or listened to it, check it out. If you haven't, you can go to my website. It's Andrew Van Wey, VANWEY.com, or just Google Andrew Van Wey. There's just me and one other Andrew Van Wey in Texas, who I'm also friends with. Oh. But you will come to my website first. And yeah, you can check my books out there. You can get samples. I have a newsletter that I highly recommend because I show pictures of my dog and all sorts of things. And, I think I'm kind of a funny writer in my newsletter as well. So awesome. Yeah, thanks. You can find me on all the social places too, but honestly, I'm really more active on Facebook and I don't need a whole lot of social media distraction in my life. But yeah, ping me there and check me out on my website. And thanks for having me, Vincent.
Absolutely. Sounds great. Well, do stick around after I shut the stream down. Just need to give you some information. But listeners at home, both live and on demand, all links are in the description. And Andrew, thank you again for joining me.
Thanks, Vincent. Have a good one.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can watch the episodes live. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest writers and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, Thank you for listening. See you next time.